Hey everyone, and welcome to class for Wednesday, September 2nd. I have someone who wants to say hello.
Hello.
Janie's here doing school too. So today I'm going to start here in our calendar with what your homework was for today. Hopefully you've been able to finish what the eyes don't see. If you haven't been able to finish quite yet, there's still time before this assignment's due, but you want to try to get through the book as quickly as you can. And then for today, you are also supposed to listen to the TED Radio Hour segment, How Does Trauma Affect a Child's DNA? You were also supposed to complete parts 1 and 2 of your Unit 1 assignment sheet, and we're going to use those today for your reading response to this video. So again, if you're not sure where to find this assignment sheet, all you need to do is go to Blackboard and remember we are in Unit 1. So to find the Unit 1 calendar, to find the Unit 1 assignment, all of that stuff, you're going to go over here to the Unit 1 tab. And under the calendar, you'll find the assignment sheet. Okay, if I were you, I would download this assignment sheet to your desktop, and that way you can access it whenever you need to. Don't forget, in the next couple weeks, we'll be working through all of the parts. So right now, we're just in the inquiry phase of this assignment, which is where you're trying to figure out what you want to write about. And it does take some time. All right, well, let's go on to Nadia Burke Harris's, this is her segment on the TED Radio Hour. She's being interviewed by Guy Raz, who's the main host for this show. So when I was listening to her podcast, I took a ton of notes. And so it really does help to take notes. Here's just kind of a picture of some of the notes I took. You can also have timestamps with your notes. You can also look at the transcript for the podcast as you're listening to it so that you can kind of write things down as you are noticing, especially any connections that you're making to the book that we're reading right now, Dr. Mona's What the Eyes Don't See. There's a segment of this I'm going to play for you guys because I'm going to talk about the connections that stood out to me the most. And remember, everybody, what stands out to you may be totally different, but I want to talk about what stands out to me. This is toward the end of this radio hour piece where Nadine Burke Harris is talking about where do we go from here. So the TED Talk has been mostly about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and how they have these effects on our long-term physiological health. And the more, she cites a study from the CDC and Kaiser, and according to the study, the more adverse childhood experiences we have, the more likely we're going to have these different physiological health outcomes like heart disease or diabetes, as well as some mental health issues like depression and suicidal ideation. So the information she's presenting as a pediatrician, by the way, which connects to Dr. Mona, who's a pediatrician as well, as she's sharing this information, it can feel totally overwhelming. Like, well, what do we do about these adverse childhood experiences? What is sort of the solution here to these children who experience these things? And she talks about the solutions. She says there is actually hope for these children. So I'm going to play this segment of what she has to say.
I mean, the kids that you have seen, right? Is there any hope? I mean, is it reversible? Is there any way to deal with that?
Yeah, so the good news is yes. Now that we know that your environment has such a profound effect on your biology, one of the most important things that we can do is early detection. So in San Francisco, we created the Center for Youth Wellness to prevent, screen, and heal the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. We started simply with routine screening of every one of our kids at their regular physical. For our patients who do screen positive, we have a multidisciplinary treatment team that works to reduce the dose of adversity and treat symptoms using best practices, including home visits, care coordination, mental health care, nutrition, holistic interventions, and yes, medication when necessary. But we also educate parents about the impact of ACEs and toxic stress the same way you would for covering electrical outlets or lead poisoning.
So here, Burke Harris is talking about these concrete solutions. She says there are solutions to providing supports to these families where adverse childhood experiences are more prevalent. And a lot of times those do connect to class, right? Socioeconomic class and even race. So that got me thinking about Dr. Mona's book. And there's a part, so I'm gonna have a little story time for you today. I took a picture of my book where I have my some of my annotations, and I have it here for you. And I connect this so much to what Nadine Burke Harris just talked about with some of these programs that she's started in San Francisco, and some of the things that Dr. Mona has started in Flint, Michigan. So here, Dr. Mona is kind of talking about the American dream, right, in this Flint, Michigan crisis. She says, where is the American dream in this scenario? It's not there. It's not even talked about. She says here, too many kids are growing up in situations stacked with insurmountable toxic stresses and every barrier imaginable. Too many kids are growing up in a nation that does not value their future or even try to offer them a better one. Here, where she talks about that toxic stress, that has everything to do with those adverse childhood experiences that Nadine Burke Harris is talking about as well. She says down here that as she's talking to the mother of two of her patients, the mother says, what can I do, right? Like, how can I help my children who've been drinking this water? And this is what Dr. Mona's advice is. She says, keep doing everything you are already doing. Love them, talk to them, sing to them, read to them, give them great food, I replied. I encouraged her to fill the nutrition prescriptions downstairs at the farmer's market for fresh produce and urged her to sign up for WIC. By the way, WIC is a food supplemental program for children and families. There's a special Medicaid expansion and universal early intervention development support offered to Flint kids. You've been getting the home delivery of kids' books every month, right? Mental health support is nothing to be ashamed of, I said. So here is the number to the trauma crisis line if you need it. Don't forget about the mindfulness workshops. They have them in the schools now too. Parenting support classes are being held on Tuesdays, and they even do home visits. I took a breath and said, and make sure you come visit me often. She goes on to say there's another thing that might be helpful for a lot of these families, right? She says an intervention of a good job, a living wage, those are one of the best she can think of, right? So this also goes back to some of the socioeconomic issues that we're seeing. Without a living wage, how are people able to pull themselves out of poverty? But here is where I'm most drawn, and that's where Dr. Mona says the most important medication that I can prescribe is hope. I connect that so much to Dr. Burke Harris's discussion about there is hope. There are these interventions that can help support and possibly reverse the effects of the toxic stress of environmental injustice like lead leaching into the water, or even adverse childhood experiences like a child who witnesses domestic violence in his home. So to me, that really stood out, and it got me to asking questions, which is another thing that I've asked you guys to do. I took a picture of my list of questions. This comes from the unit assignment sheet, part 1, which is where I kind of challenge you to write 20 questions. Now, you probably didn't get all the way to 20 questions, but the more you push the questions, the more interesting the questions become, and the more kind of filtered down the responses become. So I'm going to show you a list of mine. And what you'll see as you read through some of these is I'm really interested in justice. You know, maybe it's because I'm a mom myself, but I want to know, like, who do we hold accountable here, right? And what role do certain things play, like someone's socioeconomic class, right? Their poverty level. What role does race play, especially considering that so many of Dr. Mona's patients are Black and brown children? What can be done to help these families? You know, what is the hope for them, especially as victims of this crisis? Who should be held accountable? Is it GM or some of the auto industry, you know, who led to maybe some pressure on the government officials, which kept them quiet, right, instead of releasing this, the lead level information? We think about government itself. Dr. Mona is a big believer in good government, but what happens to her in Flint really makes her almost question her own beliefs about whether or not government can have these regulations that can keep citizens safe. So what role should our government play in our public health, right? I even connected it to maybe today with COVID, right? So this is a public health crisis that happened, and these are some of the measures that were put into place. What kind of parallels are we seeing right now as far as information or misinformation dealing with the coronavirus pandemic? Environmental injustice, where else has that happened, right? What other places in the country? How were they solved? Were they ever solved, or did they just kind of lose the limelight? Who was ultimately held accountable? And then what might issues in Flint, how might some issues in Flint actually be prevented? So things like poverty or high incarceration rates, high crime rates, could they be prevented by helping provide more interventions for these families, like Dr. Mona and Dr. Nadine talk about? So you should be pushing these kinds of questions too, and they can definitely relate to what you feel most interested in as you're doing your reading. Okay, so where do we go from here? In your reading response today, you're going to let it be a threefold response. Here are your questions, and they will also be under this video in the class blog. But I want you to answer these 3 questions. First, for you, what are the most significant connections between Burke Harris's commentary in the TED Talk and Hannah Atisha's What the Eyes Don't See, so Dr. Mona's story? This does not have to be a long response, but I do want you to attempt to put in direct evidence from both sources, okay? Number 2, using your notes from part 1 of the assignment sheet, which is the 20 questions, list at least 5 questions that spark your interest about this book and make you want to know more, okay? And then number 3, using your notes from part 2 of the Unit 1 assignment sheet, I want you to argue whether or not the TED Radio Hour segment that features Nadine Burke Harris is a credible source. So review that material on evaluating sources. Is that TED Talk, this one, is this a credible source? I want you to use those notes to kind of help you develop your argument. Okay. Last, let's talk about your homework for Friday, okay? Now that we've finished the book, we are kind of leaving our class discussions and entering this phase of you working directly on your project, okay? So for Friday, you are going to begin researching a possible second source for the Unit 1 project. Remember, you can only use 2 sources for this essay. And I know a lot of you are going to be itching to use a 3rd, 4th, 5th, but this is not a research paper, not yet. What you might write about in this first paper is something you want to continue work on when we enter into our researched argument unit during unit 3. So hold on to it, if you're really into the topic. But for right now, you're just looking at 2 sources. One is what the eyes don't see, and the other is a second source of your choosing, okay? I want you to find 2 possible sources and just grab the links for those 2 sources, okay? They cannot be sources that we've already used for class. Now, you may end up using a source that we've used for class in some of these discussions for your synthesis paper, but for the sake of Friday's class discussion, bring 2 new sources. That way, when you share them with your classmates in the discussion board on Friday, your classmates will have lots of different sources that they can potentially use for this paper. You just might spark an idea in someone. So let me do a quick just sort of research tutorial. I'm going to use NPR because that is our essentially our class textbook. And if you've noticed, a lot of the supplementary materials we've been using have come from TED Radio, which is an NPR affiliate. So NPR stands for National Public Radio. And to get there, you just go to npr.org. Okay, so this is the home page of NPR, and you'll see some news as you scroll down. And up here at the top, you'll see some different sections of NPR, arts and life, music, of course, news and health, science, technology, etc. Different shows and podcasts that you can listen to. And then here is the search box. What I want you to do is consider your questions, right? So I'm going to pull my questions back up. Here are my 20 questions or so. And what I really am interested in at its heart is justice, right? So who do we hold accountable for this tragedy? So if I just do a simple search of Flint, but I'm going to use this, I'm going to use quotation marks around Flint water, because what that will do in my search box is that it will only pull up sources that have cited Flint and water right next to each other. So I don't want articles on things like just on Flint, Michigan that might not be related to the water crisis. So I'm going to say Flint water and justice. Okay. Now there are a few things, just putting that in, I already have these 28 results, and these are all from NPR. So most of them are articles, some of them might be podcasts, and you can look at those. You can also see what subjects they come from, so, whether it's kind of law, a law piece or politics piece, etc. You can also filter by things like the newest article, so what's been written most recently. So I'm going to click that just because I'm always interested in, what is being written recently on Flint, especially now, years after this Dr. Mona's research happened. So when I do that, you'll see here, ACLU lawyer explains what $9 million special education fund means for Flint kids, okay? Well, I'm already curious, now, wait a minute, there was a settlement. So what is the settlement all about? And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that fairly recently, Michigan has been forced to pay Flint residents. Okay, so the state government is actually a part of this settlement for these folks affected by the crisis. So I might want to look at that and kind of compare maybe some of what's happening in Dr. Mona's book to what's happening now, right? And how her research sort of sparked that. Or even looking up here with $9 million. So of that $600 million, $9 million has gone into a special education fund that will follow Flint kids. And so if I click on this, this source is a pretty short kind of podcast, but you can also read the article. The article has lots of different hyperlinks as well, so you might want to kind of access the sources that are referenced here in the article. But as we go through, we figure out that one of the reasons they're allocating this extra money towards special education is because lead is a neurotoxin, right? And so it can really affect brain development, and it might end up affecting a child's, whether or not a child has a learning disability or a problem, a special education problem. And so here, this article is kind of looking at that. Well, you could connect that in a lot of ways to Dr. Mona and her research, where she's talking specifically about what the effects of lead are on development, especially a baby's development. So guys, I want you to go in and find at least 2 sources. You don't necessarily have to use NPR, but I encourage you to, just because it is our class textbook, and also because of how varied the source material in NPR really is. So you can have news articles. Most of them are well supported with evidence, and you could then even link into other sources as well, from some of these articles. So that's what you need to do for Friday. Don't forget too, on our calendar is the RET Lab evaluating sources. You'll need to finish that RET Lab module by the end of the day on Friday the 4th. And hopefully that'll support some of this work that you're doing as you start dabbling in research for academic writing. All right, guys, that's all I have for you. Don't forget to answer the questions below in the comment feature. And then, as always, get back into that comment thread, look through what some of your peers are saying, engage with them, and remember that sometimes your peer can spark an idea that your teacher never could and that you could never figure out on your own. So don't forget that comment thread is there for you. I will talk to you all soon. Let me know if you have any questions. You can stop in too for a conference if you need to. We'll be in office hours, Ms. Black and I both, from 1 to 3 today. Bye-bye.